Alright, welcome back. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you are. This is the Potato Smasher. Today we're going to be doing yet another weekly review, this time on the USS Baltimore, the Tier 8 American heavy cruiser. Arguably one of the most powerful cruisers in the game, and arguably one of the most overpowered cruisers at Tier 8. And it's a combination of fast-firing 203mm guns, fairly resolved armor, good AA defenses, good stealth, good maneuverability, so on and so forth. Now, of course, no Baltimore review would be good without slotting the fairly obnoxious but fairly fun to look at Freedom Camouflage. As you can see, it changes the turret geometry slightly, gives a giant bronze eagle on the superstructure. The ship itself is still visible, and you can tell that this is very much a Baltimore. I don't know, I don't like this camo. It's kind of fun to look at, though. It's just obnoxious. It's like, yeah. Anyways, go over the build first. I suggest getting the B hull first for 42,400 hit points, as well as and then, of course, going with the Mark 8 fire control system next. For your upgrades, main armaments modification 1, engine room protection modification, aiming systems, steering gears, and of course concealment. Now, the build on this commander is slightly messed up. And when I say slightly messed up, I mean completely messed up. I'm waiting for 0.7.7 to drop so I can respec it. So in the meantime, we're just going to follow my Alaska build, which isn't perfect either. So of course, your standard line would be expert marksman, priority target, superintendent, and concealment expert, and then go with heavy AP shells, adrenaline rush, concealment enhancements, and of course gunfeeder. Now, I would suggest actually putting 4 points into top grade gunner instead, just because of how effective this the skill is. You just get a permanent 8-second reload, like every single time you get spotted. Or like if you're within a standard detection range, your reload speeds up by 8 seconds. So this is a big help for the Baltimore, especially American heavy cruisers in general. Anyways, moving back to the Baltimore away from the Alaska. First, we're going to start by taking a look at her armor and her survivability. Now, Baltimore does have a couple of strengths in her armor, and she does also have a couple of weaknesses. For starters, she does have 27mm plating, which allows her to ricochet 381mm and smaller guns. However, if you run into 406mm rifles or larger, such as those found on something like a North Carolina, you will find yourself getting overmatched quite hard. And with the lack of a heal, Baltimore would crumble quite quickly under sustained battleship fire. Of course, another thing she does have going for her is her fairly low in the water citadel. Her citadel barely sticks out of the water. It's just above the waterline, but it's very small, very difficult to hit. In addition to this, if you were to skip over the top of the citadel roof and try to land citadels from here, that's next to impossible because of the fact that the roof is 65mm. This is important because it cannot be overmatched by any ship in the game. Yes, literally. Not even Shikishima's 510mm guns can do this. And of course, we have to take note of her citadel placement. Her citadel is just above the waterline, I want to say. It's not enormous. That's one advantage she has going for her. Overall, I give Baltimore in this department a B. And you're probably wondering, well, hang on, Potato, why'd you give it a B? Shouldn't this be like A-grade armor? Well, yes and no. You see, the 27mm vulnerability is still very much an issue. Even if you run into a bunch of French and German battleships at this tier, you still have to contend with the American and Japanese heavyweights, not to mention you have Soviet battleships as well, and you have, like you get up tier, you see a lot more 406mm and 457mm guns, which will make short work of your HP pool. Overall, good, but not great. Anyways, moving on to her gunnery. Baltimore's gunnery is fantastic. She has your standard American 203mm guns. However, compared to the previous ships in the line, the Pensacola and the New Orleans, these guns are slightly different. She doesn't use Mark 12 and Mark 13 guns, she uses the Mark 15 guns. Or was it the New Orleans that used the Mark 14s? I don't remember. Anyways, these Mark 15 guns boast a couple of advantages over the New Orleans' guns. First of all, they have a 3-second faster reload, a 10-second base reload compared to the New Orleans' 13-second base reload. Second, they have the improved American armor-piercing shells. Now you're probably thinking, well, hang on, Potato. Again, like, doesn't the New Orleans also get improved auto-bounce angles on its shells? Well, yes, but here's the thing. These Mark 21 armor-piercing shells differ in a couple of ways, and it's not really present in the presented stats that are displayed here on the tech tree page, or like in the port. The first stat is the fact that it has extremely high crup. If you were to take a look at the crup value on these shells, it's 3,800. Well, New Orleans' shells are somewhere around 2,600, 2,700. And second, these shells are heavier. You can tell this just by how much extra damage they deal. The New Orleans' shells deal 4,600 damage, and the Baltimore shells deal 5,000 damage. And more importantly, they're a little bit slower. And I'm probably thinking, well, that's not a good thing either, is it? Well, it sort of is, but it sort of isn't. Well, it's not really a good thing because it takes longer for the shells to actually reach their targets. But the upshot is that if they do hit a target, they're less likely to overpenetrate on a more thinly skinned cruiser. Like if you were, say, facing a Dallas as a Baltimore, you'd be less likely to overpenetrate. Whereas if you were in something like a New Orleans, because of the flatter shell arcs, you'd probably be more likely to actually overpenetrate than Citadel is. In addition, she also has some fairly consistent high explosive gun rate. The HE shells haven't really changed from the New Orleans. I think a slightly higher fire chance, but otherwise relatively similar. Overall, Baltimore's gun rate gets an A from me. What it would take to make her an A+, though, would be a slight improvement to her reload, and I guess a slight improvement, well, that, or a slight improvement to her shell velocity. But let's be real, she's already overpowered. There's no, in some aspects, there's no real need to push that any further. Moving on to her anti-aircraft defense. Her A defense is good-ish. I don't want to say it's as good as it used to be with the RTS system, but it's still good, don't get me wrong. Fully upgraded, she has 341 continuous damage, with her short-range AA guns dealing 176 damage, medium-range AA guns dealing 342 damage, and her long-range AA guns dealing 114 damage. She pumps out 6 flak in a single per salvo, each shell dealing 1,617 damage. I think that's just because I have the perk for it. Now, her anti-aircraft defense does have a couple of strengths and a couple of weaknesses. First of all, she can slot defensive AA fire to increase the intensity of it. And second, just the overall DPS. The baseline DPS is high enough that even Tier 6 carriers will struggle. However, there's a couple of problems. First of all, her range is fairly short. Now, 5.8 kilometer range AA isn't something to laugh at, it's actually pretty good. But the problem is her mid-range AA has a range of just 3.5 kilometers, and her short-range AA has a range of just 2 kilometers. This means that carriers don't have to spend a lot of time in these anti-aircraft rings to actually get a strike off, which means that even if you are against top-tier, like bottom-tier carriers, if they're skilled enough, they'll still be able to drop you. Though that's really just a fault of anti-aircraft defenses being somewhat mediocre these days. Another problem that she has is that all of her anti-aircraft mounts are fairly clustered around her superstructure. Yes, she does have some anti-aircraft guns located in the bow, as you just saw there at the forward 40mm quad Bofors, but take a look at where most of her anti-aircraft defenses are. I'm mousing along by just clicking on this, and you're seeing that most of her Bofors are concentrated on her superstructure or around her superstructure. This is the area that gets targeted the most frequently by destroyer caliber high explosive shells, cruiser caliber high explosive shells, so on and so forth. So it's problematic, right? And this also brings back another fairly prominent weakness of this ship. Again, going back to the 27mm plating. The problem is that if you're top tier, you really don't have to worry about enemy cruisers being able to HE spam you to death, because they can't pen this. Tier 6 and 7 light cruisers only get 25mm of high explosive penetration. However, if you run into, if you run into something like a Nuremberg or a York, of course that's a little bit different because they're Germans, they have improved high explosive penetration. But then you get into Tier 8 matches where suddenly everything can penetrate your armor. You have Chapaevs, you have Clevelands, you have Bayards, mines, a lot of other things. And you tend to fall apart pretty quickly against sustained high explosive fire unless you get oversaturated. And this also factors into the AA mounts being a problem because they take damage fairly quickly as well, just because they're so vulnerable and exposed. Like, look where this 40mm Bofors is, and you take a look at what those Orlikens are. There's Bofors here. You kind of get the picture. She's pretty vulnerable to getting her anti-aircraft defenses knocked out. Now, of course, you're probably saying, well, Potato, that's a problem shared amongst most cruisers, and I would say, yeah, you're right. But the problem is Baltimore's anti-aircraft defense is pretty powerful in its own right, and so if you strip that away, she can't really defend herself against one of the things that she's really good at defending against, which is aircraft carriers. So is this a problem? Sort of. But can she mitigate it? Not really. But does the anti-aircraft defense work when it works? Yes, against top bond tier and equal tier carriers. Tier 10 carriers, however, will have no problem striking her whatsoever due to them having larger plane reserves, faster planes, larger plane HP, so on and so forth. Overall, in this department, I give Baltimore a B+, simply because anti-aircraft defenses, as they stand, are a little bit questionable. Baltimore's AA defenses just happen to be on the better end of things. Maneuverability. This is one of Baltimore's great strengths. First of all, her top speed isn't too bad at 32.5 knots. There are slower cruisers at this tier, and there are faster cruisers at this tier. However, Baltimore's turning radius and rudder shift time are among the best of heavy cruisers. Now, she doesn't have as good a radius as some of the light cruisers at this tier, but it's certainly very competitive and very much workable. Like, if I were to, say, take a look at my mines, I'm just going to bring it up here really quickly. It has a 10-meter tighter turning circle than my Baltimore. However, it's half a knot slower, and you're thinking, well, that's not much of a problem. Okay, that's not much of a problem. But here's the other thing. Baltimore also has a very fast rudder shift, even without slotting, like, say, the 5th slot rudder module. You don't need it, because, yeah, you can slot 5th slot rudder on, like, say, a Mogami or a Shot Marcel, and it works just fine, but you really don't need that on the Baltimore because it just turns so well in the first place. Like, Baltimore is one of the best handling cruisers at Tier 8, and this gives her a couple of advantages. First of all, it's not she can torpedo beat very well compared to other cruisers. Like, if you were to throw torpedoes at, say, an Admiral Hipper or a Tullen, they would struggle because, well, first of all, they're larger ships, slightly larger ships. But second, they have slower rudder shifts and they do have larger turning circles. So I'm just going to go mouse over the, just to prove my point, I'm just going to go very quickly and mouse over the Tullen's turning radius. Now, Tullen is not exactly the ideal example because this thing has such an enormous turning radius that it's kind of hilarious. Like, look at the size of this thing. It has a 900-meter turning radius, and it's like, yeah, its fully upgraded rudders, I think, around the same as the Baltimore's, but its radius is huge. And you compare that with the Baltimore, which has a 730-meter turning radius. The difference is immense. Like, you can throw this thing into torpedo nets, like torpedo nests. Like, at this tier, you have a lot of torpedo destroyers. You're infested with your Kageros, your Sashi. Like, Sashi is not much of a problem, but you have your Ilans, your Kageros, you have your Bensons, so on and so forth. You could throw this at them. You have your Hydra running, and then you can just slalom between the torpedoes effortlessly, whereas something like a Mines or a Hipper would struggle, just because they're slower rudders and they're fairly large turning radii. Yeah, Mines has a 720-meter turning radius, but its rudder is pretty slow compared to the Baltimore's. Overall, Baltimore gets an A in this department as well. There's no real need to improve it. And finally, we move on to her concealment. Baltimore's concealment is arguably one of her greatest assets, and it's for a couple of reasons. First of all, it's just really low in general for a heavy cruiser. 9.9 kilometers. Most heavy cruisers at this tier, with the exception of the Otago, the Mogami, and the Albemarle, are all above 10 kilometers. You have Char Martel, which is 10.7, Hipper, Eugen, which are like 11.3, 11.7. Amalfi is 11.5, and even some light cruiser, like there's a light cruiser. I think mine's had 12-kilometer concealments. Like most of the light cruisers at this tier have similar or only slightly better concealments. Only Belfast 43 has the really large margin with a 8.9 kilometer surface detection range, and of course Edinburgh with its 9.2 kilometer surface detection range. So the stealth itself is very good. But then you factor in the other thing, which is the radar. Baltimore has the ability to stealth radar, and it's due to the fact that her surveillance radar has 10 kilometers of range. Now, of course, you're saying, well, Potato, her detection range is 9.9 kilometers, a 10 kilometer, and her radar range is 10 kilometers. How's that stealth radaring? Well, you see, what stealth radar isn't really exactly the ability to radar from outside of your detection range and pick enemy ships up. It's the ability to radar instantly the moment you're detected. This is something that the Buffalo and the Des Moines don't enjoy, since they have to move a little bit further. Buffalo has a 10.6 kilometer surface detection range, and Des Moines has a 10.9 kilometer surface detection range. It's just that ability to radar the moment you're detected that makes stealth radar ships so dangerous. Like if you're, say, something like a Tallinn or a Chapayev, which also have enormous stealth radar gaps, you can see that working in your favor, because you can instantly turn your guns onto whatever's coming your way. And like the moment you spot them with your radar, you can just blap them. And Baltimore is extremely good at blapping destroyers. Again, her high explosive alpha is actually fairly high, and if you were to utilize it well, you could quite easily devastate most destroyers in short order if they continue to push in. Of course, one downside is that a radar only lasts 27 seconds, which is why I suggest getting the radar module, and of course, changing your commander build so you can get a boost to your radar duration. But that's that, really. Extremely good stealth. I give Baltimore a A on this. Now, of course, we have to talk about the history of the ship. Baltimore does have quite a decorated history. As her description states, a Baltimore-class heavy cruiser. Increasing the ship dimensions allowed engineers to improve her survivability by means of reinforcing the deck armor and enhancing the protection for the propulsion. Another difference from her predecessor was better AA capabilities provided by the cruiser's numerous dual-purpose artillery. This is translated from Russian, so let me just bring up the actual history of the ship very quickly. USS Baltimore CA-68. The number is present somewhere, I need to check. Anyways, Baltimore was the lead ship of her class, obviously. Her design was, well, she's 664 feet in length, with a overall length of 673 feet, but 664 at the waterline, sorry. Her beam was 70 feet 10 inches, and she had a draft of 24 feet. Her full displacement was 17,000 tons, which was fairly hefty, and she had a crew of 1,142 officers. She served in both World War II and the Korean War. She laid down in May 1941, launched in July of 1942, commissioned in April of 1943, and she was decommissioned in May 1956 after the Korean War. She earned 9 battle stars, and unfortunately, there are no Baltimores left in existence, unfortunately. She was scrapped in 1972, which is kind of a shame considering how revolutionary the Baltimore's design was. Yes, the Wichita was also revolutionary, but this was really the next step towards the improvements of American heavy cruiser design. Anyways, actually there's a little bit of an interesting bit of history concerning the Korean War. The North Korean, there's a Victorious War Museum in North Korea, apparently, that states that the Baltimore was sunk by motor torpedo boats belonging to the Korean People's Navy on 2nd July 1950. However, there's a slight problem with this bit of historical fact that Baltimore was sunk, Because guess what? Baltimore wasn't actually in commission at this time. She was recommissioned in 1951. The Koreans claim she was sunk in 1950, which is a bit strange. The actual battle was, USS Hunyu, which was a Atlanta-class light cruiser, and the Black Swan and the HMS Jamaica, which was a Fiji-class. And in any case, well, that's just propaganda. I can't really say much more about that. Anyways, now we're going to move away from the ship in the port, and of course we're going to go take a look at some gameplay, as I usually do with this particular segment. Alright, so now we're going to get into the gameplay clip with the Baltimore. This is a game I played while I was still running the stock rangefinder, so my range is only 14.4 kilometers. But I digress. So, just looking at the team lineups here, we have a Tier 8 carrier on each team. And of course we have multiple Tier 6s, we have Tier 6 battleship, we have 2 Tier 6 cruisers, and of course we have a Tier 7, Tier 6 destroyer per game. Per team, sorry. However, one thing I want you to pay attention to is the enemy Albemarle. We're going to be seeing quite a lot of him in this game. He's going to actually top the enemy team on base experience earned and such. Now, taking a look at my positioning, where I want to be right now is, you see that islands on the F34 line? That's where I want to be. Actually, just give me a second, let me switch something out, because wargaming bugs are fun. Anyways, so I'm going to get into position here, right along this island where my cursor is. Because this is one thing that the Baltimore is good at, it's good at hugging islands. So I'm going to swing into position, like this, and I'm going to island farm, right here. Now, of course, I'm being careful here because I don't want to push too far ahead. If I push too far ahead, I put myself into a very vulnerable position where I can get crossfired and taken down by, well, Tirpitz isn't much of a problem, he's moving towards the center of the map. However, we have a New Mexico, we have a Vanguard, a Trento, and Albemarle, and of course we have the threat of the Lexington here, so we have to be careful about that. So, I'm moving into position here. I'm switching to the armor piercing, anticipating that the Albemarle is going to push up. I'm calling priority target on the Tirpitz, see if my team will focus it. Now, of course, the one thing you have to notice here is that the London is a bit of a potato. He does go AFK, so there's that to consider. Now, I'm being very careful here. I'm pushing towards the island. I'm not firing my guns just yet, because I want to get into position before I actually open fire. I'm switching that to the armor piercing because I notice that the Albemarle is about to go full broadside. I start turning in. I take a decent lead on the Albemarle, and I open fire. First salvo on the Albemarle does a reasonable amount of damage. It was, yeah, roughly that. 9,240 damage. I keep firing on the Albemarle. He starts super healing immediately. I got another Citadel for another 7,800 damage. I've done 17,000 damage so far. I accelerate and turn into the islands, and I focus my fire on the New Mexico. However, like I said, we're going to be seeing a lot of this Albemarle in this game. I get overpenetrated by the Tirpitz, thankfully I didn't get Citadels, and the Albemarle starts focusing me. I take a fairly hefty amount of high explosive damage. I bow in and swap to my high explosive, so I can deal with this New Mexico pushing in. I'm trying to sidle up to this island here so I can mitigate the maximum amount of damage taken from the Albemarle here, who's now set me on double fire. At this point, I should be relatively safe from the Albemarle's firepower. He's turning away, and now I have the flat broadside of a New Mexico to shoot at. However, as I incorrectly predicted, I'm not safe from the Albemarle just yet, so I start backing up all the way around the island so I can mitigate the amount of damage he does. And I keep my fire on the New Mexico. You'll notice that I'm actually dealing a fairly decent amount of damage to the New Mexico with my armor piercing, and that's because of the fact that I have those improved auto bounce angles and the improved damage from the shells. Now, this is something I didn't notice at first. I only noticed when when I heard the whistle of the bombs. Lexington comes at me from overhead, and this is somewhere I'd say I got very lucky, because the Lexington completely misses his shot. New Mexico continues to ricochet shells off my broadside. I set a fire on him with my secondaries, and, well, there he goes. Richelieu finishes him off. So now I'm thinking, I'm on 12,000 health. I have to play very safe, very conservatively here. There's 2 destroyers on the enemy team. They have a Z-31 and a Shinonome. And I'm thinking, well, the Z-31's on the other flank, so this is going to be the Shinonome out here. So I'm going to instantly start turning out, so I can see if I can deal with the enemy Trento that's moving up from behind. At the same time, of course, I have to be careful with the enemy Vanguard and the enemy Albemarle. Again, the Albemarle, we're going to be seeing quite a lot of this guy. I get spotted, so I immediately switch on the radar, and the Shinonome starts opening fire on the King George. Much to his mistake. Well, not really to his mistake. This guy played really good this game for a, bottom tier destroyer. I load my high explosive, and I start taking pot shots at the Shinonome. However, I'm continuing to move behind the island. I'm not slowing down because I know the Albemarle is going to try and pick me off. Land some fairly hefty hits on the Shinonome, about 4,000 damage, and that's when he starts smoking up. Did I land any further hits on this? No, I missed. So at this point I noticed a couple things. One, the Trento's running hard. Second, there's a Vanguard that's pushing in. I want to deal with this Vanguard as best as possible. Now, he's a bit of a dangerous target, because he does have 380mm guns, which I'd bounce, but he does have that improved British armor piercing, well, British battleship armor piercing. So I start shelling the Vanguard, and I prepare to start turning in if he gets his focus on me. Hit with high explosive salvo for about 4,600 damage. He shows me a nice flat broadside. Hit him with the armor piercing. And this salvo did a fairly ridiculous amount of damage I wasn't expecting. 10,000 damage, 8 out of 9, which caught me off guard completely. I was like, yo, that's not right. You'll probably see me type in chat pretty shortly after I'm done with the engagement on the Albemarle. Okay. So while we're waiting on that chat, let's take a look at our position on the map. Shinonome's run away. We got the Albemarle in the back. We got the Tirpitz moving in. We have a Trento, and we have a Nuremberg. London is, of course, still AFK. So, how do I do this exactly? Well, I can spam the Tirpitz to death, obviously. But I decide, do I want to sit Bowman? I do, I guess, but there's a Lexington coming for me. Or there is a Lexington, but if I get spotted out, I'm going to be in a lot of trouble here. And again, my gun range is too short to effectively disengage without trying to, avoid killing the... Because I can't avoid going for this Tirpitz. I have to help my Richelieu out. So my plan here is to create a crossfire on this Tirpitz. I start turning away immediately. And I stick with my armor piercing. Armor piercing does minimal damage, so I swapped to... actually, no, I stuck with my armor piercing here because I was hoping he'd give me a nice flat broadside. Tirpitz shoots at me. I get 5,500 damage. I immediately start turning away after my next salvo. Did it a bit too late. I take another 2,300 damage. Keep shooting, because I want to distract this Tirpitz as long as possible from my Richelieu. At this point, I've done 95,000 damage, which is pretty substantial. In like 10 minutes with Baltimore, 95,000 damage is pretty good. So I'm just keeping up the sustained high explosive fire on the Tirpitz, hoping to just keep them distracted long enough that a Richelieu can escape behind an island without, getting chased down by the Tirpitz. At this point, the Tirpitz is probably steaming mad at me, because he wants me dead. I'm on just under 7,000 health. And I know he's like, come on, I want to kill this Baltimore, let me kill this Baltimore. I'm like, no, I'm not going to let you. I'm going to keep cutting away as long as he's in my effective gun range. And, like I said with my Baltimore commentary earlier in this week, the Baltimore is a very good kiting ship. I get a fire on the Tirpitz misses, and that's when I notice the Nuremberg is spamming me. So I immediately turn away, and I decide to disengage, because I'm getting crossfired here. Turn out, that's my Confederate. Actually, I kept firing here for whatever reason, I'm not sure. I probably should have just gone silent here and repositioned. I keep firing salvos just to keep distracting the Tirpitz so that my Richelieu, who's running away, can get back into position. This Richelieu also does a fairly good amount of damage. At this point, though, I notice something odd. There's a smoke screen, first of all, that's covering the Tirpitz, which must mean the Shinanoma's here, and second, the return of the Albemarle. He comes back to me, sets me on fire instantly, which is a bit annoying. Thankfully, at this point, I've run out of gun range of the Tirpitz, which means he's like my gun range, so the Tirpitz is no longer spotting me. The Albemarle can't spot me, the Shinanome won't spot me either. So now I have to deal with the Shinanome. I'm up to 106,000 damage, which is fairly good. Enemy team is down down like just over like 130 points, and they're down one ship. So at this point, I'm like, oh, I can get a bit aggressive here. However, do I really want to get aggressive here? Maybe not. And this is where I accidentally fire my guns and give away my position. So now I am forced to turn in towards the island and go silent. Not too much of a problem, though, considering that, again, Baltimore's concealment is extremely good. I'm going to try and use my concealment advantage here. I get hard spotted temporarily, because that was the Shinanome spotting me out. I keep dodging and weaving against the Albemarle shells, and force the Albemarle to go look for another target. At this point, the Parseval is going after the Tirpitz, so I know he's not going to be too much of a problem, because you have a German aircraft carrier going after a German battleship. See that there was a triple citadel, I believe. Tirpitz is on now just 5,700 health. So, my goal here, by moving up to this island, I'm pushing in so I can spot out the Shinanome. And I choose not to fire here for a very particular reason. Yet. Because I want to confirm that the Shinanome is in fact in front of me and not behind the island. In fact, he is in front of me. Honestly, I probably shouldn't have hesitated on the radar here. I should have just punched the button. Would have dealt more damage to him. Missed my first couple of salvos. Lexington comes in with the torpedo strike. Nuremberg gets slapped really hard by something. I think it was the Nelson there. Land one shell on the Shinanome. I turn in to dodge Lexington's torpedoes. Again, you see another advantage of the Baltimore here is the fantastic handling. I switch my fire to the Nuremberg, switch to the armor piercing, just in case the Trento shows up, turns back and tries to deal with me. I fire my hydroacoustics so that I don't get caught by torpedoes, and the Nelson picks up the Nuremberg. So at this point, I'm like, I want to disengage here, because if the Albemarle focuses back, I could be in danger from him. I'm on 6,300 health. Trento can also engage me, and I would be dead. At this point, someone comments that the London is AFK, which is true. London is AFK. Shinanome gets spotted out again. He's firing his guns. He's charged straight into the teeth of the Nelson. At this point, I'm in trouble, because, well, here comes the Lexington's dive bombers again. And here you see the highlight of the Baltimore's anti-aircraft defenses. I'm actually shooting down Tier 8 planes. He rushes his drop, misses, I turn in just enough to avoid getting bitch slapped by the Tirpitz. I keep my guns silent. Richelieu knocks out the Tirpitz, and I call for I need anti-aircraft fire support, because if the Lexington comes back for me again, I'm going to be in trouble. And that's when the Lexington gets spotted. And I'm like, I want to shoot at this Lexington. I really want to shoot at this Lexington. However, I want to take out that Albemarle at the same time. Now the problem is, first of all, he's way out of my firing range. And second, at this point, the Albemarle will probably have his spotter aircraft up, which is another problem because he can just HE spam me to death. Now, I guess I was just being a bit too conservative with this game, I want to say. I probably could have just forced myself into firing range on the Lexington, and I would have been able to take him out. At this point, it's 5 versus 4, London is still AFK. And at this point I notice, well, there's a Shinanome. It's behind the island, sure, but I can just get my guns onto him. Or I choose to try and get my guns onto the Lexington instead. However, I still want to be undetected here because I want to pull off an ambush against the Albemarle. This guy's been playing really well this game, and I don't want to give him any opportunity to be any more of a threat to my team at this point. I'm tempted to shoot at the Lexington, but I was just waiting for the Albemarle to open fire. He immediately starts turning away from the Richelieu. Once he fires, he's spamming the Richelieu to death. And it's not, that's, like, Gat's stock Richelieu, but he's got, like, 35,000 health. Lexington's coming after him. I'm just waiting for the Richelieu to distract the Albemarle long enough that I can get his broadside. I'm moving up to this island as silently as possible, so that the Albemarle doesn't see me coming. Parsifal's keeping the Albemarle spotted out. Now, of course, I was hoping for the Parzival to force the Albemarle to turn back into my guns, rather than out of my guns. And I'm just waiting for the Albemarle to get too tunnel-focused on the Richelieu. Was it my mistake? Yes, this was definitely a mistake I could have avoided here. I probably should have just opened fire on Lexington and just dodged the Albemarle's shells. Albemarle gets bitch slapped, and this is where I take my chance. I've opened fire on the Albemarle, praying, and I flood my salvo. Completely. I start dodging very heavily, like, just weaving back and forth. Albemarle's reload is slower than mine, but I'm hoping that the Richelieu can get another salvo off. I start turning away because I know there's a C-31 and a Shinonome. I want to avoid getting crossfired by those two. And the Z-31 opens fire from my side. Gets one salvo off. I'm at 728 health. Take out the Albemarle. Thankfully he misses. And so does the C-31. Well, except one shell. And now, I'm on 358 health. Unfortunately for the C-31, he's on 48 health, and I have my radar ready to go. And there we go. Kill secured. Easy. Anyways, I'm just going to fast forward this game, because this is pretty much over. I just dodged the torpedoes from the Z-31. Now, of course, at this point, I'm somewhat concerned because the Shinonome could just as easily start capping. But at this point, it's like, do I really bother? And I'm like, nah. Wait for the Richelieu to get into the cap, and then I just steam out. I just do a little bit of trash talking. Shinonome's trash talking, I decide to trash talk him back just for the memes. I tell Parzival to check F5 or F6 because that's where I think that the that's where I think the Shinonome will be. At this point, though, game's pretty much over. Not really much more that needs to be said. We cap the base, I think, and that's pretty much game. Anyways, that's the gameplay, and that's the review of the ship. I sincerely hope you enjoyed this commentary. I do apologize for any background noises you might have heard. Still trying to sort some things out, like a proper recording schedule and eliminating any background noise. I just hope that maybe the logarithm picks me up. I don't know. I'm just a dude who's making videos. Anyways, that's all I have for you guys today. Potato, out.